When you put all the different layers of changes that have happened to us over the years, you have a pretty full picture of how much art has evolved as a digital practice. And especially because art kind of tends to portray the things of its time, it is easy to find in art the representations of what people are worried about, what people are thinking about, what perhaps is going to be happening into their lives in the future. This GIF from King Kong, the 1933 movie, shows the very beginnings of animation in film. That is not digital art yet. That is the beginnings of a mixture of different media into one and the same media. And yet it is giving us the idea of exactly how the future of movies would eventually happen. Again, the mixing of different methods, some of them more or less old than others, and many of them kind of mixing into our common imagination to make these kinds of characters. And so very quickly, you can follow or track the changes that happened to King Kong. This is from the 1976 version of the movie, where the ape is a much more visible, much more elaborate, much more animated character, albeit not yet in the levels of digital media that we are seeing today. There is a composite of two different images that is achieved by ways of something that is almost quasi-digital. And of course, there's a pretty big change between 1933 and 1976, about 40 years or so, and we can see how much things have progressed. But also, many people could see that things had progressed only to a certain extent. This extract here from Richard Williams, who was the animator for well, Roger Rabbit and Pink Panther, a bunch of very classic 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s movies and animation, tells us that yes, King Kong is a object of animation that is remarkable as far as he is concerned, but it is also something that has to be the product of a human intervention. This is not something that a computer could possibly do, at least in 1982. And his idea was that certainly something like King Kong is a remarkable feat, but it is only remarkable in as much as it is an animal, and there are limitations to what an animal can do. So therefore, we should not be surprised that a nice ape could be represented by animation because this is something that is within the realm of current animation. And he tells us King Kong could be beautifully animated by a computer. You've all seen that in animation. And he compares that to in animating the same with a princess, kissing a prince. A computer can do that for you, but people don't kiss like that, he says. It doesn't have the kind of the scattered movement, as he points out here. The same would happen if a princess had to kiss a prince as animated by a computer. If you're going to animate a kiss, it's a pretty hard thing to do. You have to do it with great skill and feel. To feel, that's what the hell I've learned for 30 years. If it isn't feeling getting in there, well, what is he doing? What did he learn about the animation of people? He has been observing people and observing how they behave to recreate that in animation. Rembrandt, he painted the man in a golden helmet, as you might as well say, we'll get a computer to do that. So we'll program the computer for gold and program for compassion and program for irony and program it for texture and program it for drawing. I mean, we'll do it. What the hell? Animation hasn't gotten as good as the man in the golden helmet. Very skeptical, very almost cartoonish version of what an animator can do, because the idea was that, yes, there is enormous amounts of work to do, and yes, it does require very specific, very precise skills, but this is something that could legitimately be done with a computer, considering that you have the technology for it. Now, from the 1976 King Kong to 1982 Williams, there is a little bit of a step that has been made, but certainly if we compare it to the modern day King Kong and what that animation is, if that animation loaded, uh, you can just Google the trailer for the upcoming King Kong movies. Well, they are a lot better, a lot more developed than anything that could have been thought of at the time. At the time was the development of the first fully animated movies. And this excerpt here from the trailer of a movie called The Works that was in development from 1979 to 1976 at the New York Institute of Technology. That's a movie that would be fully animated by computers. And it was started as a 2D animation, but very quickly they realized that 3D was the way to go. And as they were working on the movie, they completely changed their technology. They changed their computers, they changed their purview, they changed their tools, and that explains why for 7 years they worked on the movie, which eventually was never completed. It was never published. The reasons for that are not exactly clear. Who was in charge of deciding, and who ultimately made the decision of not putting out the movie? It's kind of an industry secret in some ways. The fact that we have this trailer is a wonder of digital technology itself. Somebody found it in the archives of the New York Institute of Technology and put it on um, YouTube about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. Um, so this development of a fully animated feature obviously took a lot of time, obviously took a lot of effort, obviously figured out that if it had to be relevant in some kind of way, it would have to adapt with the time. And as a result of that, the combination of time and money and development, all of them at the same time, ended up being unsustainable, at least in the 1980s. Because if you have to keep up with the times, if you have to keep up with the technology, if you have to keep up with the demands of the public, you are necessarily running against a complicated system that is not necessarily the most obvious to juggle, and especially if you're not was a mostly independent movie. And yet, we have, for some reason, got to a point where people are pretty much blasé about digital art. This article published by a professor at New York's Graduate Center, City University of New York, um, asked the question in 2013, what happened to digital art? Cast your mind back to the late 1990s when we got our first email accounts. Wasn't there a pervasive sense that visual art was going to get digital too, harnessing the new technology that were just beginning to transform our lives? But somehow the venture never really gained traction, which is not to say that digital media have failed to infiltrate contemporary art. Most art today deploys new technology at one, if not most, stages of its production, dissemination, and consumption. Multi-channel video installations, photoshopped images, digital prints, cut and pasted files. These are ubiquitous forms, their omnipresence facilitated by the accessibility and affordability of digital camera and editing software. There are plenty of examples of art that makes use of Second Life, YouTube clips, iPhone apps, etc. So there is this understanding that the technology has improved. So therefore, if we have better technology, if we have quicker technology, and this is more affordable, we were, I guess, entitled in 2013 to expect a little bit more digital art to be created. But this professor especially pointed out that this was not done in very novel way, not innovative way. This was done in a way that was still working alongside the old system of mixing media with one another, and so including digital media into existing forms, or including existing forms into digital media either way. Now, again, this is not new, especially new as of 2013. People have been doing mixed media art for a very long time. And the difference fundamentally between mixed media and multimedia art is obviously more of a matter of semantics than anything else. You mix the media, you take many of them, you put them into the same medium, then you have achieved some form of a crossover between different forms of art. But have you really changed the art? In as much as we have changed and the technology has changed and the art has changed, their fundamental ways to do art have not very much changed. It might be due in part by the attitude that Williams had earlier, that people tend to have a very closely held relationship with certain forms of art, maybe certain forms of behaviors. And so if you see a form of digital art that takes you out of your comfort zone, you might not really react well to it. And it would result like the works, like a movie that looks specific to a certain era, but probably would not be very impressive if it came out only a couple years after people had fundamentally improved the technology. So there is this dialogue that exists between the world of non-digital art and the world of digital art, and those two are slowly starting to mix, and this is causing a little bit of a stir as things go. Just earlier this year, a painting or a form of art created on the computer won at the Colorado State Fair. The Colorado State Fair's annual art competition gave out prizes in all the usual categories: painting, quilting, sculpture. But one entrant, Jason Allen of Pueblo West, Colorado, didn't make his entry with a brush and or a lump of clay. He created it with Midjourney, an artificial intelligence program that turns lines of text into hyper-realistic graphics. And I think we've mentioned those in class before. This is one of the ways in which we have used our artificial intelligence to create images. And so the process remains the same. This person fed a line of text, a description to a artificial intelligence system, and the system created an image which he entered into this. So the skill here is very debatable, whether the skill was to have the correct prompt, whether the skill was to have the correct prompt that would be created for a affordable or available form of digital art, whether the skill was just to come up with an idea and then have the computer do it. It did create somewhat of a stir for people that put in more work into the job, maybe more feel, maybe more of whatever you mean when you think of art, but it was not very well appreciated that an image that is created by a computer, apparently with very little physical effort, perhaps very little effective effort, could have won a competition. But we could also see this the other way. We could also see this as a sign that at this point in time where we are standing, digital art is becoming more and more appreciated. That even a state fair in Colorado would be able to appreciate a drawing that is made by a computer, regardless of what the author is doing, regardless of the amount of effort that you can see an image that was not made using human intervention, although that itself is debatable. Somebody had to make the AI, but in this case, this person did not create the AI, so that would not be fully crediting him for somebody else's work. Oh, speaking of crediting people from somebody else's work, this is a real concern that is happening right now with works that are created by AI, because if we are going to speak of ownership in terms of what people do with their art, and perhaps when it comes to selling the art, ownership can be traced, but copyright is very difficult to enforce. And people have been asking this question of copyright. The first issue is whether anyone can actually own an AI-generated image. At least in the US, the answer isn't clear, but despite what you might think, it probably isn't you. Copyrights are a form of intellectual property protected by federal law. Owning a copyright gives you the exclusive right to reproduce, publish, and sell an original work of authorship, such as a book, a painting, a song. Under current copyright law, artists using traditional mediums such as paint, pen, paper hold copyright over their work by default. But what if the work is generated by AI? According to the US Copyright Office, copyright law only protects those works that are made by human being, not those of a monkey, an elephant, or an AI model. If a human didn't author the work, the Copyright Office won't register the copyright, and you can't sue someone if you can't register your copyright. In the eyes of the Copyright Office, the public is free to reproduce, publish, and sell your DAL-E 2 generated masterpiece, no strings attached. So The biggest problem here comes in the shape of money, that somebody put a lot of money into making that work, but that work can be sold and can be reproduced, and can be transferred around without any kind of additional effort needed. And the work belongs to everyone, and everyone is able to do whatever they please with it. That is a pretty big change in terms of our economy, and especially in terms of art economy, because people are used to liking things for their rarity, for their level of skill, and whatever. This requires not much skill. This requires not much rarity. This just requires appreciating a thing for what it looks like. And whether or not ownership of a computer image, whether that computer image is represented into a poster, for example, on your wall, or even a framed shape of some sort. It could be done by painting it for lithograph or whatever. Then the image is once again crossing different realms, and once again making us reconsider the actual benefits of using computer technology to make art as we do today. And even then, DALL-E has a few limitations. For example, if you try to make DALL-E draw a copyrighted character, it probably would not do it. If you try to make DALL-E create racist artwork or weapons of war, scenes of war, etc., it will not do it. So there are limitations to the things an artificial intelligence can do, because there are some laws that still apply to the people that make it work, and they do not want their computers creating art that could be used for for hateful purposes and whatnot. So there are even creating legal issues, if their digital art were to get a copyright strike by somebody else because it represents the likeness of somebody else's intellectual property. So there are a lot of legal issues that are legal battles that are kind of brewing in that sense. But there is one way to think about art, and especially art generated by computers, is in terms of the legacy. That's David O'Reilly says, again, 2022, consider how the following scenario might play out. You train an AI with your own particular likes and dislikes, and every consideration you put into your work. Eventually, it takes over and makes everything for you, so you can slack off. It can enable you to work in all forms, creating films, books, albums, designing fashion, culture, architecture. Each can have your personality and style. It can then go further and tweak your work for every member of your audience, depending on their preferences. Then it keeps going after you die, simulating new inspiration, imagining how your incorporate changes into the world from beyond the grave. So you can train an AI, as we have seen, because AIs are the result of moderating inputs and outputs. And if you are skilled enough at using artificial intelligence, then you can make a system that would create something that looks like what you tell it to do with intentional design. An AI could have the mark of an author the way that traditional art would as well, which would allow you, if you are a skilled artist, to make all kinds of products which could be sold to all kinds of people. And people could get extreme enjoyment out of it because they could also use that same AI to represent things in the way that they like and the way that you have trained it. So again, mixing media, and at this point in time, the media is a mix of people's intentions, people's ideas. That would be kind of an ideal scenario as far as the art is concerned, because no one has any any art that is identical to one another, but everyone has a piece of art that is individual to themselves. And more importantly, it could outlast any one of us. It could outlast the artist himself. And again, regardless of what the copyright law is, allow that artist to benefit from his work after his death, and maybe allow their family to continue to benefit from that artwork as well. Maybe in terms of financial ways, maybe in terms of the name that is attached to it. And who's to say how these things could go? It doesn't have to be a monetary compensation, in as much as it is a recognition that many artists in the real world have never received during their lifetime. And as a result, that family are sometimes squabbling over after their death because they are trying to have some credit for something that their ancestors have not had. So there is a lot to be said about this, and because it is a this decision about art, this is something that is obviously much bigger than any one conversation, and that certainly is not going to stop here.